Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
It's true.
I wanted a dramatic pause there.
That was good.
Let people wait in that tension,
the drama,
anticipation of Alex. Anyways, how's it going?
It's going well. Easter has finished.
It is
Come and gone.
Or it is finished, I guess we shall say, and then Jesus rose again, which is nice. It's not quite.
It is finished indeed.
Spring, officially it's spring.
It's officially spring, but is it?
It's, not feeling.
It's a typical Midwest.
Always like that. So I don't know about you all, but after Easter, and obviously Easter can be really early, really late in the year, what is like the next thing that you look forward to? Because I feel like for me, like I go from Christmas to New Year's to, then there's Valentine's, you got St. Patrick's Day, and then Easter kind of sprinkled in there. And then it seems like maybe a bigger gap towards, the next big holiday. So what's the next thing that you all are like, hey, that's a thing I mark on the calendar. I can't wait for that to happen. And it can be maybe something personal in your life right now that you're like, I just can't wait for that to happen, or maybe a tradition every year.
Right after Easter, anybody that loves being outdoors knows I'm just ready for the weather to be nicer, because this is when I start getting my yard ready. I have the yard on the street that's hanging baskets. I got my hostas coming up, and I'm ready to plant some flowers. So that's the next thing I do between. It's kind of like Easter and Mother's Day. So, and then we've got some birthdays in there. My husband's birthday's in between there. And then my oldest is turning 8. So it's a pretty busy time of year for us. So it's kind of moves us into the busy season a little bit.
So
School's ending.
No lull for you. It's just
let's go.
Okay.
When do we sit? When our kids are 7, 6, and 3? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm asking myself that.
How about you, Eric?
For me, this is a very Eric answer, but usually
I love Eric answers.
What happens in June is the Electronic Entertainment Expo, E3, and that has been a tradition for so many years that I look forward to. And with COVID and different things like that, and plus it's changed. It isn't probably going to happen this year, so I'm kind of bummed out about that. But pretty much what it is every summer, a lot of video game developers and marketers, all the things video games get together in LA, and they present what's coming in the future year. And it's always gamer Christmas, and that's something that I love. I always get really excited about it, and just lots of headlines about new stuff happening and things like that. So I don't know what it'll look like this year, but usually after Easter I'm okay, this is
the next
coming
thing.
up, or Comic-Cons and that sort of stuff, different conventions and things like that happen in the summer. So I don't know, that's my nerdy stuff I look forward to.
Love it.
And yeah,
I think for me, obviously, this goes without saying, opening the pool in our backyard is coming up pretty soon.
I'm glad you said something, because I was going to ask.
That's why I said it before you all did. There is no pool in my backyard, anybody. That's
allegedly.
Ongoing joke.
Eric and I say otherwise.
And so that's not actually it. I think for me, it's the end of the school year, summer. My kids always, I feel like the last few years have had field trips right around this time. And so it's always fun, a way to jump in on a field trip with my kids. For our family, birthdays basically go from November to April. And then there's nothing April to November. So it's pretty consistent and constant. So birthdays aren't really a thing, but Mother's Day being splashed in there, Father's Day being splashed in there, but those are fun, but they're not I can't wait for this day to happen. Typically every year I've been on a mission trip until last year on Father's Day, because that's always when we took our June is the time for a lot of mission trips, and so that was typically it. So Father's Day's never really been a huge thing, around here for me, or at least in my life. I do love my children, but
And you love your dad?
And I love my father, Philip Ferris. Love you, and
he's a good guy.
That's my answer.
All right. Well, sounds good. We've got so much more to look forward to, including headlines coming up next. All Our headline today comes from WOWT.com. It says Westwood Cinemas 8 in Omaha closes after decades of showings. From what I understand, this is a really sad moment for a lot of people who grew up going to this theater. Didn't AMC Oakview close a while back? Go switch ownership or something?
No, it's gone.
Yeah. So see, that one, when I'd visit Omaha, because I didn't grow up here, that was the one that I always went to because that was like the big theater in Omaha at the time. So I don't really have the connection to Westwood. But as you know, Alex, before the show, you were letting me know this is a big deal for people.
It's a gem. So I grew up when we moved to Omaha. I lived about 120th in Center, 127th-ish in Center.
Oh, you were right there.
So this was right there, and you know, for my family, that we going to an actual movie. We were not doing that. This was like the dollar theater, you know. So you could go to this place as a kid. And I just remember there's like the tunnel with the lights. It felt like it was from like another 100 years from now. You know, it was like one of those places you'd walk in and it just, walk in the middle of the day and then it's dark and everything and you feel like you're transported to another world and you'd go watch a movie and only spent $1. And so I had a lot of moments there.
Wait, I think I'm just now realizing where this is. This is off Center? It's at the back of that mall.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Have you been there now?
I have been there. I don't really have the same feelings, but yes, I have been there.
Like I would skateboard up to there with the homies and we would go watch. Yeah. So it's bittersweet as the owner puts it, Morin. I think that's how you pronounce their last name.
Yeah, I don't. Be careful with that. You don't want to say anything insulting.
Dennis Morin.
So what is the reasoning they're giving for closing?
He's 77 years old. This guy is, and he's bought it from, like, this has been purchased a few times over the last few decades, but he says, I'm 77 years old. I'm tired of running things. The wife and I want to do more. And with the pandemic and its streaming taking over younger generation of the theater business, Jan and I decided that we want to move on with the life we've got left. And then assuming obviously nobody else, it's probably not the best investment property, as is, for movie theaters right now. So, because it seems like most movies, I mean, even that whole genre of movies after like AMC would release it and things like that, then it would kind of release to these lower dollar theaters, and then come out on VHS and things like that.
It's like they've skipped that.
Yeah, almost. There's not even that availability. Like, what is that middle ground now?
I'm laughing. I find it so funny.
Usually we can understand what you're laughing about.
Let us in on the joke.
This is like I just think you're so passionate and like it is like a little spot for you, and you're the one out of the three of us that like watches the least amount of movies. That's why I'm laughing.
Yeah. That's why I was fascinated to hear his connection to it too.
And you're just sentimental. I love that. That's why we love you. That's,
I could walk there.
Yeah. It's part of your childhood. I feel like I just like grew up. This was like always a part of. I remember going in high school.
The family get the 15 passenger van. And we're all going to the movies.
The conversion van. That's what we had back in the day. And then I just have memories from different times of my life. Not living close, but just I was at a time where that's where you went and you just like bought your ticket outside and then you walked in and it was like this little octagon that you could buy like all your popcorn from, and like you're saying, the tunnel. And so it was just fun. I have great memories there. I'm sitting here just laughing at like the different people I've gone with. I didn't realize it was a date, but in college I got tricked into going on a date to this movie theater.
Oh, wow.
So that will always hold a little special place in my heart. I'm like, wait, I thought this was like a friend group. Yeah. Oh, it's not?
When did you realize that it was
like
a date?
when we got there and like I was paid for by this other person and
that's awkward.
I think that the movie theater, it might have been this movie theater, is probably
they said
the first time I held hands with a girl.
Oh boy, yeah.
Wow. So now the truth comes out. This is why
there's other connections. It's just crazy.
Well, it's like, you do you're both sitting next to each other, dark movie theater, probably watching, I don't know, Land Before Time 6 by that point. And then you just you test the water, you move your hand over, and then it just is like,
This is
a
happening.
third of the way through, you both hold hands and nobody talks about it. Like, you don't talk about it. You're just like, that just happened.
It was the scary part in the movie.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah. Well,
good times.
It is going to be, it's interesting. Like, I mean, my kids are, I take them to movies and they get to have that theater experience. And as we move pretty rapidly to this like new streaming reality, there was a time through the pandemic where I'm like, maybe theaters are going to die and we're never going to see them again, but I'm thankful that they're still around. I think that experience is hard to replace. I mean, even though sometimes the people in the theater can kind of ruin that experience for you. So it's like, maybe I'd rather sit at home. But there's just something about getting the energy you feel in an auditorium with people and you're experiencing the same thing at that moment. It's pretty hard to replicate anywhere else. So, it's sad to see this place go. Maybe someone will swoop in and remodel it and make it something special. Who knows? But
please,
or it'll just become a church. That does it for headlines. Up next, we're going to be joined by Josh Dotzler again, and he is going to join us for a conversation about virtue signaling. So stay tuned for that. All right, today we're talking about virtue signaling. But before we dive into that, Josh Dotzler, you're with us again. It's good to have you back. Thanks for joining us.
It's good to be back, man. Excited.
Virtue signaling is a term that we saw, I feel like it really took off during the pandemic. You started to see a lot of people talking about that term specifically. But for those who are not familiar with it, it is defined as the act of speaking or behaving in a way that's meant to demonstrate one's good moral values. For example, if a person widely proclaims on social media that they strongly support a certain cause just because they want to show others how caring they are, that person is considered to be virtue signaling. How familiar, before we did this episode today, is everybody pretty familiar with the term? Has heard it before?
I wasn't very familiar with it.
Okay.
My wife started to use it. I don't know how far back, probably around the time that you were talking about, and she was using virtue signaling. I didn't know what she was talking about, and so, but I feel like over the course of the last couple of months, really last year or so, I've seen it more and more and have been more aware of it. I did ask somebody if they knew what it was before we came on the podcast. This is like a 20-something-year-old. She said she had never heard it before.
Yeah.
So I think there's such a wide spectrum of people who maybe are familiar, maybe not. But I do feel like it's something when you see it, we've all seen it.
Yeah,
you
for
know
sure.
what it is.
Yes, and you can't unsee it
Yeah,
once
that's right.
you know
Once
what
your
it
eyes
is.
have been opened.
Yes.
Seriously.
And probably all, to a certain extent, or at least I'll throw my cards on the table, have done it or been
100%.
tempted to do it
Yeah.
for sure. I know we talked sometimes, even Eric, a little bit about it in our social media platforms. Like I know when you jumped on staff, there was this real pressure from churches. Like anytime something bad happened, it was like this pray for movement, which I feel like from churches became this brand of it's virtue signaling. Like we're not actually stopping to pause and having a prayer vigil over it. But, I think of things like, a shooting in France or down the nightclub in Florida that was like Parkland, all these different places. It seemed like every time there's a tragedy, a church had to respond so people could start to like that and share. And it was gold. It was social media gold as far as getting interactions and getting people to interact with it.
Well, and I think that was the problem that I had with it immediately. It was just that, where is our heart in sharing this? Like, yes, praying for the people involved in this situation that's what we're called to do. But are we sharing this post just to get the likes because this is going to help our algorithm and we know that we can, play into that moment? And I think for churches, the value a lot of times is much more in getting people to rally around what the community can do in your own community and not just like, oh, okay, let's pray for this. I mean, it's not that the sentiment isn't there. It's not that you don't care. It's just what are our real intentions for posting that?
Yep. No, it's a good point. I mean, I was thinking when you said what you said, Alex, the amount of times we say, oh, I'll pray for you. And how many times do we do that? But with social media now, I mean, it's not just I'll pray for you. It's I'm not actually saying I'm going to pray for you unless I post it.
Yeah.
And there's such a response that we're looking for. So when I think of virtue signaling too, I mean, social media has created this culture where we're constantly looking for responses. And one of the best ways we can get a response is to try to post something for what we're for, or, we're thinking about praying about something or someone. And I just think social media has heightened our ability to try to put out there something we're for, even though maybe our lifestyle doesn't reflect it at all.
Well, it seems like it's, with all the different movements we're called to on a daily basis, a lot of times that's where it ends. So for most people, if I tweeted out Black Lives Matter, if I tweeted pray for France, if I put the goofy Facebook filter over my photo, and if I did that thing, then people know I'm aware.
Right.
That makes me look accountable to this, but there's no skin in the game at that point. What did you do beyond that other than making? I mean, it reminds me of even calling out the Pharisees for like praying the loudest and praying in public these big verbose prayers to get the attention of people and make them think that they were holier than others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. How about you, Jess?
I think like you're saying, Josh, there's like this culture that is around social media, but it's also a pressure because I even remember in the past year, I would say 2 years, like pandemic, Black Lives Matter, all that. It's like people were saying, I'm noticing the people who aren't posting and who aren't responding, and those people are getting unfollowed, or I'm questioning their integrity. And so I think that there's this big thing that we're missing of like, there's this judgment that we can have when we're looking at other people. Because what if you really do have opinions about the pandemic? I'm thinking even of like things more recent of Ukraine. Like, what if I have feelings of that and that's all that I can do is share my thoughts, and like that's how I'm expressing myself, but it can come off as virtue signaling, or it can come off as us not doing something. And so I think that there's also this thing of, okay, what's my heart and where am I coming from? But then there's also this, we're looking at other people and I'm judging you. Well, what did you say?
Right.
Did you make a post about Ukraine?
Yeah.
Like, what did you do?
Yeah, right.
About, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, I see what you're talking about and what you're not. And it's really like a check yourself type thing, which is, I think, hard.
Right.
Yeah. It is. It's difficult. And what you brought up, I hadn't even considered that, of like how many people are like, I've had siblings or people I care about that are like, well, if you cared about me, you would, during this month, you would, put this flag up, or during this time you would use the hashtag. You don't use the hashtag because you're afraid of what people are going to think of you. And you're like, holy cow, like I don't even know fully what the hashtag means. And some of this stuff just catches fire so quickly that it's like, I've shared enough things without waiting to get the results or hear what something's all about, to put my foot in my mouth enough to be like, okay, let's just pause. I want to be someone that's on the forefront and look like I know everything, and I'm all in, and I'm, all for every cause. But then I've done that enough that it's like, that wasn't the best. And sometimes it lives. Yeah. It's like a digital tattoo gun. It lives on the internet forever when you do something like that. So
I feel like this, when I was looking at the definition of virtue signaling, I'm like, these are the posts that I'm embarrassed about, like from 2006 or 7, or, like back when we were in college, and it was just like posting a Bible verse or like a pretty quote, because that was like the right cool thing to do. And it's like, okay, now I'm looking back at that and I'm like, why did I post that? And that's what's going to happen now too. It's like, what's my heart when I'm posting these things? Like, where's my ambition coming from that? And then I'm going to have to like look back on it later, or someone's going to find it, like you said.
Yeah. Well, it's like, to some degree, that's what social media has been built on. I mean, it's been built on pictures and visuals that probably don't represent your whole life, but represent some of your highlights and the best angles. And I think virtue signaling, just with all that our world has gone through, Black Lives Matter, the pandemic, we live in such a polarized society. It's like, hey, you got to take a stand. You've got to, and it's almost as if you don't respond on social media, you're not taking a stand. And I remember going through the Black Lives Matter movement, and the debate was, man, do I post? Do I not post? And I had relationships, people, friends on both sides, and I believe in what the movement represented in people who didn't have voice and didn't have platform. But what I told people is, you know, I'm standing in the middle and leading people towards justice, reconciliation. I never once posted BLM or Black Lives Matter. And it wasn't even something I did intentionally. It was just something I looked back on. And number one, as an organization and just individually, one of the things we've said is we're not going to hang our hats on protesting. We're going to invest. Don't protest, invest. And that was a result of things that happened earlier. And so we're going to let our life speak louder than just our posts. And the other thing is, there are a lot of other ways to communicate what we value versus just jumping on some cultural bandwagon to say, hey, if you don't say it this way, then you don't believe that. And so one of the things I thought of when we were talking about, you know, this virtue signaling, it's when you post stuff or share stuff that's inconsistent with your real values and what you're living on a daily basis, that's where there's the gap between trying to put, you know, a certain face forward. And I think there's actually some positives to virtue signaling.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's something about taking a stand. There's something about action. You know, I think good intentions without action actually lead to, you know, frustration, being a distraction. I think they don't allow us to state what we're for. I think the wrong intentions with action lead to transaction, where it's just a one-way thing. You know, there's some good in it, but it's not really transformational. I think good intentions with the right actions actually leads to the type of transformational change, impact, where it changes us and also hopefully impacts those people that we're standing up and standing for.
Oh, that's good. I think we just came off of Easter weekend, and there's like almost this pressure to like make sure you got your Easter family picture, you know, out there to let everybody know you dressed well. You were in
we
church,
didn't get ours this year, man. I kind of felt left out.
I was wondering if you guys went to church.
We didn't even get one. I know.
Right.
Should we invite him back this week? Is he still saved?
I was questioning my own salvation. I'm like scrolling, seeing all these family pictures. I'm like, wow, we didn't even get one this year.
That was us too. I guess didn't happen.
Oh man.
Yeah.
No.
It's a weird thing because I think we're building these billboards of our lives out there that and we don't always consider the opposite. Like I did see a post from someone who was grieving that they weren't able to post, you know, their family for Easter because they're like, I'm just sitting here in the hospital now with my kid who's sick, and I'm looking through all these posts and grieving the fact that we don't get to make that post, you know. And it's one of those things where it's the best intentions. Sometimes you don't realize the consequence or even what that makes other people feel. And it's not that we have to be accountable to everyone's feelings all the time. I'm not saying, I mean, you could stress yourself to no end if that's what you try to do. But I do think that it's important to think of others' perspectives and when you're posting that stuff.
I think there's also this other aspect of, I want you to know me. Like, I want you to know that, like, I value people and I value what's going on. And so there can be this tendency of, I don't know, I just think of like a water bottle and you like put all the different stickers of like, I hiked here, I've been here, like this is my gym, like this is my CCC sticker that I like slapped on the back of my car. And it's like, we want people to know like, hey, we're safe, like we're trustworthy, we're approachable. So that's where I think it gets like you said earlier, Josh, it's like, it gets kind of messy because there's this, okay, there can be a bad intention with it of like, I just want to share and have an agenda maybe with it, but there's this other part where it's like I can empathize with of like I really care about what's going on and I love people and I want my friends to feel like I'm a safe person. And so that's where it's like we look inward, I think.
And I think
like
you
our
saw
intentions.
that. I think even with George Floyd, you saw that. I saw a lot of people posting who I would not imagine would post about something like that, but I think it was something captured on video that was so horrific that people, just your good intentioned people are thinking, well, cops shouldn't be doing this. I gotta say something. This is bad. It's like, and if we can't call out evil, then what can we call out? Right. You know, so when evil things happen, it's like, we need to say something. I don't know if it's going to do any good or not, but this was a bad thing, and I need to say that this was a bad thing, even if it's just for my own coping mechanism. I need to say this is a bad thing, but then stuff like that starts to take this turn, and then when people start to label it as virtue signaling when maybe it wasn't, that's like you said, it gets messy.
How do we start to, how do we each start to make these decisions about like what gets, the post, what doesn't get the post, what gets a public statement or what doesn't? I know, like I had a conversation with a gal last week, just calling the church, and she just wanted to know, hey, I think the church should be leading the way on this stuff. And we want the church to speak into this. And why don't you guys go out and, make this statement about this thing or that thing? And so there is this pressure sometimes to make that statement. And then if you make one about this, then there's an expectation that you make it about the next thing and so on. So how do you all, I guess on your own personal platforms, but obviously each of us has some kind of influence, like people are listening to this even right now. How do we start to process and make those decisions about what does get posted, what doesn't get posted? What do I attach my name to publicly?
I mean, I'll start by saying we're all one post away from getting, whether it's canceled or, muted or unfriended.
Yeah.
People stop following us. And so I definitely don't want to act like I have any of the answers, because I could, leave here today and post something. But I think my wife made a statement. She said, we're not called to keep up with the culture. We're called to create a new culture. And I think so often when I post stuff that reacts to something that's happened or reacts to what everybody else is doing, I'm putting myself in a position to either post something that's inconsistent with what I believe or take a stand in a way that maybe I don't feel, fully sure about, versus like for me, trying to just post what I'm for. And regardless of what that's around, regardless of what that is, people can always, question, man, you didn't post enough or you don't post enough around. But it's like, when I do post, I want to let people know what I'm for. And I might not have all the answers. I might not know the entire story, but trying to lean in the direction of what I'm for. And I just think in general, that's what Jesus did. And I think sometimes when we don't let people know what we're for, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of, but if we can, in our own way, not based on what culture's saying, man, post what we're for in a biblical way, I don't think we can go wrong consistently. People can question us, people can disagree with us, but in general, man, we can feel confident about what we're posting.
Yeah. For me, I think my draft box is full of things that like I was going to tweet out or respond to, and I've learned over time through some mistakes to leave them in there and sleep on it.
Slow to speak.
Or send a copy to somebody.
Yeah.
Or just DMs, like so much, I've learned can be solved, and not everything by any means. Like I remember for a while, a few people that are really close to me, they were just like going every day, like fighting on Facebook, some family member.
You don't have to talk about me like that.
It wasn't you. I also saw you and a family member, Eric. And like I remember, I just like set up a conversation, like with the three of us. Like it was a family friend and a family member, and I just sent them both like a $10 gift card to Stories or Starbucks or something like that, like an e-gift card. And I was like, you two need to take advantage of this and use it.
Yeah.
Because there's just some of that you're like, okay. And so that draft inbox, DMs, and I've still failed, but like, hey, asking for some solid advice, because I want to be witty, I want to be clever, and I want to be ahead of like a trend. Like it feels good to be like the person that made other people aware too. Like there's power in that for me.
But yet on the one hand, it's so tough. I mean, even like I love what you're saying about what you're for, but I think sometimes in a world where everything is so polarized, it's almost scary to post that.
Right.
Because you could say I'm for one thing and people may look at that and go, well, that aligns in my political worldview as right or left. Right. Mm-hmm. So you're obviously left or you're obviously right. What's wrong with you? Right. And so that like what's the what's the solution to that, and how can we? I mean, it feels like you just need to over-explain everything, but even then, sometimes it can just be one key word, and people will just file you away on whatever side that they think that you're aligning with, no matter what that is.
Go ahead. Well, I was gonna say every situation is so different, and that's where it is hard because people can cut up, tear up.
Yeah.
I do think we have to find a way in creating a new narrative, a third option.
Yeah.
I remember when Coach McDermott got in trouble for using the word plantation. And, there was a lot of people wanted him to be fired for his job. There was other people that knew him that felt like it was a mistake. And as somebody who knew him, I felt like two things were true. One, it was something that should have never been said, and it shows how far we have to go. On the other hand, I know he's a great individual with great intentions, and his life, speaks differently than that message that he shared. And so for me, it was about trying to communicate and capture both of those pieces when people were trying to take sides. And I think so often, I do think that there's a way to create a narrative that says, man, I'm not saying I'm fully with their decisions and what they believe and, this, but man, I am for people and I am for this. And so I don't know. I think my dad says Jesus didn't come to take sides. He came to take over. And I think there is a Jesus narrative that we have to keep finding. It's not just there. We have to find it, tap into it, and really focus on that.
That's good.
Yeah, I think one of those statements in the church that I think being pro-life, right? Like the church is pretty pro-life, and when people hear that automatically, I think it's like, yes, we should fight for sanctity of life, unborn babies, all of those things. But there's a whole other mantra of what it means to be pro-life, and then sometimes people will hijack that. Hey, if you're pro-life, then why aren't you, posting Black Lives Matter, because their lives, so then it becomes like even clouded of like what this definition means. Like I remember growing up, and what it meant to be pro-life was you stood along Dodge Street with a sign and got people to honk, and that is what it was only attached to babies that were unborn, which is something that the church should be fighting for. But then it seems like the inequity between that kind of pro-life and maybe death penalty or other, maybe war. There's so many other ways to be pro-life. And so sometimes it's like, well, I post that I'm for that. And then all of a sudden I get attached to other aspects of that, which is more difficult. And so and that's why I think even when we have conversation on here, trying to define what we mean by it is important, because otherwise people will write the definitions for us, and that's difficult, and that's exhausting too.
I think there's, like we've talked about, this pressure and this expectation, and I think that 100% there is people pleasing involved in this and what people think about us. And I think that there is this beauty to not having it all together. And I think like in our journey, like for me, like there's definitely a highlight reel of like, hey, my kids did this, look how cute they are. And I think that there's that. But then in my journey, I think just personally for me, it's like, God, my identity doesn't have to be perfect for you to accept me and to love me. Like this is like the Hot Mess Express, like going on like 100 miles an hour. So why am I going to go to the work of like making myself look like I have it all together when people want authenticity and people want to see like you and your journey? And I think that we miss that of like, hey, I'm still learning. Like I don't have this all together. I don't have to have this all together in a 2-paragraph Facebook post. And so for me, like I really like pause and think through like, I mean, just an example for me is I recently left staff here at Christ Community, and it was like a big decision for me. It was like something that's like, well, surprise, I guess lots of people probably don't know that. But it was a big thing for me of like, hey, this wasn't a perfect journey that was like a week-long decision. Like I prayed and I wrestled, and I think like I wanted to let people into that when I shared it on social media. It wasn't like, hey, Jess is like doing this and now I'm like over at City Care Counseling. That's where I'm at now, all on my own. But it's like it's this journey. And for me, when I shared, it was like I had to be really intentional because I wanted to be like, and I like obviously left here on good terms, and I love this church we are still attending here. That's nothing to do with it. But I really like when you brought this up, and then I'm doing that post, it's like, man, I don't just want to be like, this was easy for me. It's like, where's the journey? Where's the struggle? And I think that's where we also can connect with people. And there's like, we lose value in that versus like, hey, I have it all together, or hey, I'm just going to reshare this. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's good.
So with the 24/7 news cycle that we see, where there's always some new tragedy or new mode of activism that we need to partake in, different things like that. I mean, does this lead to it? Is it something that's dangerous? Is it something that we can avoid? I just don't think as humans, our emotional capacity is capable of caring enough about everything that goes on around us all the time, because we're just so inundated with tragedy after tragedy. And I mean, I think I maybe mentioned this before, but we're going through the Origin series, and I think you look at the example of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and how God was almost like protecting us from dealing with that and say, no, you can't handle that. That's for me. You can't handle that. But then you have the serpent saying, no, you could be like God if you know this stuff. And it's like, now we're just piled on all the time. And it's like, wait, maybe this wasn't what we wanted, to know all of this all the time. We can't carry this way. We're just not capable of processing this much tragedy. And I think that maybe speaks to this desire for people to go, no, I care. Please trust me, I care, and not actually know what to do. But is that? Do you think that contributes to it? What other things do you see that are contributing to this just constant cycle of compassion fatigue?
Yeah, I think that's why burnout happens for a lot of people that are in ministry. Because compassion fatigue is real. I mean, you do someone's funeral, you get phone calls of what's happening in someone's life. Some of the messages we even see just come across our website, and like there's times where I'm just like, I can't feel. Like I remember honestly when we found out that Hannah was deaf, like I feel like there's so many different people groups that I'm like, oh, my heart breaks for them. And I remember like even jokingly saying to like people like another people group that I have to that I now know about, and because I know about their issues and the struggles, and that all of a sudden I feel like I have to feel for them, which is good. I think that's the way of Jesus. But I remember just feeling like the weight of like, oh, now I know more of a different struggle that somebody has, and I have to learn to carry that and weigh in with that, and it can be
an accountability to it.
Yeah. And so and for every time I hear of a new thing, it's that weight again. And how much of that can I bear? How much of that am I called to actually take on and care for and represent and steward and fight for, and what can't I? And so that's for me a lot of times where that compassion fatigue comes in, because I'm like, I can carry it for like a week, but then I got my own struggles, then my family struggles, and then you hear all those things, and so it's difficult.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think I was thinking about the news this morning. I turned it on, and I think there was just a disaster in South Africa. And it was just like, first thing, news pops on. I was wondering if it was, Ukraine or what was already happening, and to come to find out it was something new. And I think there is this heaviness with the media and our ability to cover everything in real time and to hear about all the tragedies that are going on. I think it makes it virtually impossible to respond to all those things and to take a stance for all those things and to let people know that you're for all those things. A thought I had when you were talking is allowing our purpose to dictate our posts. And I think all of us are called to a different purpose. And all of us, God gives us a story and experiences and relationships, and I'm a firm believer that, we all have a unique thumbprint. And I think our platform can be an opportunity for us to express the purpose that God has put in us, to where we don't have to respond to everything that's outside of that, because that is where we get tired and fatigued and I think burnt out. I heard somebody, when they talked about burnout, they said burnout isn't typically doing too much. It's doing too much of what doesn't bring you joy. And whenever we're operating outside of who God's called us to be, I think that's where burnout really happens. I also think, during 2020 was the first time I heard the word compassion fatigue as much as I had heard it. And it was the first time for me that I felt like, man, our whole city was living in crisis. There was an anxiety, there was the unknown. But for me, in the context we work in North Omaha, I feel like that community lives in crisis every day. It was the first time as a leader, I felt like other leaders in our city felt what we felt on a consistent basis. Wow. Yeah. And so to some degree, the idea of compassion fatigue is an option and decision for people who have the ability, the privilege of even thinking that way. For those who live in crisis every day, that's not even something that crosses their minds. They can't choose to turn it off or turn it on. Yeah. And so I do think God uses it to do something inside of us. I've never heard a pastor or a leader talk about tithing fatigue. And I think part of it is, when I think of sports and my background in sports, we condition ourselves for what we really value. And to some degree, I think compassion is one of those things. We value it, but we don't condition ourselves in the same way that we do other things in the church. And so I think we get tired a little faster when it comes to things of compassion. And so in some ways, I do think it's even a wake-up call for us as Christians to say, man, there's a lot of need out there. And we've got to be the type of people who are willing to respond to it, which requires getting uncomfortable, which requires exerting a level of energy that maybe we're not accustomed to or conditioned to always, do.
I noticed a tweet you shared on Instagram from Rich Velados that said, "The Good Samaritan story is not just an example of compassionate spirituality, it is a critique against religious passivity. If church people won't work for justice and mercy, God will find some other people who will." So how do you feel that we're playing into that religious passivity? I think you started to kind of hit the nail on the head there a little bit with what you were just saying, but where does that play in?
I think even if we go back to virtue signaling, I think one of the things he's talking about, the Good Samaritan in this story, at the beginning of the story, he was the despised Samaritan. The person who, didn't believe what the others believed was the person that actually got down and helped. And so he responded not out of a similar belief system, but just out of seeing a need. And so I think even during COVID, the racial injustice, I saw a lot of non-believers responding, whether it's through posts, whether it's through raising money. You could call it virtue signaling. But they were taking a level of action. I saw also many Christians, I think, with good intentions, but were unsure of what actions to take for a variety of reasons. Didn't want to get looked at this way, didn't want to, take a stance or a side. But that in action, I think, also leads to a lot of questions. And I think in this story, Jesus tells with the two sons, and the father asks the sons to do something, and one son says, I'll do it, and then doesn't do it. The other son says, I don't want to do it, and then eventually does it. There's something about action, I think, that gets at the heart of God. And I think we see that in this story. And I think as Christians, we have to have a bent towards action, towards activity. I mean, the first book in the Bible where we see the church give birth is called Acts. And I think it's because there's action that happens when Jesus gets a hold of our life.
Yeah, and so much of that's just been hijacked, I think, by a political system, and that it has to be married to, especially in our cultural context, a two-party system, and that one is more supreme than the other, or one values, like I said, life more than the other, and so it just pigeonholes us in so many ways to just see through that lens, the lens of our politics or the lens of our race or the lens of whatever, instead of, the lens of what Jesus has called us to do. And so, yeah, like you said, I think in that passage, I think Jesus gives, some pretty stern warnings to people, because he's talking to a bunch of religious people as he's talking about, the Good Samaritan, and he's using this story as he's writing as an example, but he's trying to say, like, I gave you all these laws and these commands, these things to separate you from the other people in the world, especially as I was establishing a country, Israel, and trying to set you apart so you would look different. But he's like, and then you took those things and you ran them to like the nth degree and like created this whole social system out of it and made this about virtue signaling. Like he's like, hey, when you're fasting, you don't need to like put stuff on your face and make everybody look like you're miserable. Like fasting isn't supposed to be this way. He talks about that in the Sermon on the Mount, or like you alluded to earlier, Eric. Like they don't have to be these big, preposterous, beautiful, written out prayers. Yeah. Like he's like, it's about your heart, and your heart isn't matching up with your actions. And so sometimes, our actions of who we are, what we're giving to, all that starts to become, I think for us, this religious way to say, to virtual signal and say, man, we're the best. We're God's chosen people. We're better than you because we give this much and we serve this much and we do all of this. And I think he's like, no, you missed it. You missed the whole entire point of why I gave you all those things. If the world's not being affected, the actions aren't happening like you said in the early church.
That story too, it starts out where it says the religious leader asked a question to justify his actions. In other words, he knew the right answer, but he didn't want to do the right thing. And so I do think questions that lead to inaction, man, don't really represent the heart of God. I think too, I look at my parents' generation, it was very white and black in many ways. And some of the systems that are in our society today, it's very one side or the other. And even just my parents, my dad's white, my mom's black, and they saw through those filters. And I think God is raising up a new generation of people who don't take sides, of people who see a third narrative, of people who, man, it's not a white thing or a black thing. It's not a Democrat thing or Republican thing. It's a kingdom thing. Yeah. And we really get to lead with that type of heart and lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think even when you talk about taking action, it's sometimes we'll hear people say, well, preach the gospel and pray. Now, is there a third step in that, or is that the action? Is that it? Because I think a lot of times that's that response of, well, preach the gospel. That's the truth. People need to hear the truth, and they kind of leave it at that, and they put it on the shoulders of people who maybe don't know better, or people who are actually doing more than that, as being like, well, maybe that's not your place.
Yeah, I mean, I think preaching the gospel is a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. And I think even in that, the question is, man, what is the gospel? And I think we all have a bent. If you ask 10 different, I don't know what your experience is, Alex, but if I ask 10 different preachers, what's the gospel? I think I might get 10 different answers. Mm-hmm. In the sense of we probably all agree on the same things, but we tend to hone in on certain aspects of the gospel that's maybe more consistent with, what we value or who we are. And, we would break up the gospel into two parts. The first part, big picture, is God wants to change me. And that's why he sent Jesus. He loved me. He died for my sins. He rose. He wants a relationship with me. He wants me to grow in being more like Christ. God wants to change me. But the second part of the gospel is he wants to use me to change the world. And I think the whole gospel and what we see in Jesus and what we see in his disciples, we've got to, every time we preach the gospel, we have to always preach the whole gospel, calling people to repentance, calling people to life change, but also calling people to engage in God's plan to change the world. And we see that in the stories Jesus tells, in the model of Jesus' life and what he did, where he went. So I think there's preaching, there's in our process of discipling people, there's not only information, but there's action opportunities. And so I just think holistically, how we disciple, we have to not only give people the right information, but we have to give them the right vehicles to help them live out what we know God's called them to.
That's good.
And then we can be on the other side and say, there's this expectation of fruit that I need to be
Yeah.
sharing and developing. And I think that even in the midst of the discussion that we're happening, it's like we start saying, well, I should do this and I should do this. And I always like tell people when in session, when they say that, it's just like, don't should on yourself, because it's like it's a shaming word. When we say like, I should have done this or I should go do this, it's like instantly like putting this pressure on us. And it's like, then that's out of the heart that we're looking at ourselves and that we're looking at other people is like, well, I should do this. Well, where's my heart? I think it really comes down to us and like, what's God doing in my life? What's he speaking to me? What's the fruit that I want to do? I see the pressure of like being pastors and leaders, and then I don't know, receivers of the word, and like, how do I interpret this? And so
I think that word, that vernacular, preach the gospel, has been, it becomes so much about words or proclamation. One of the things I've even tried to like use is, you said the word there, just share. Like I'm invited to share, and I can't share something that I don't have, that I don't actually possess. As I teach my kids to be sharers, and really I think the original language as they're talking about that would have been understood more as like, share the gospel, take the gospel to all these places. And it's sharing something that you've internalized, that you are so grateful for.
That's good.
And then also realizing I'm a consumer of grace, I need to be a giver of grace. And so I think sometimes, I don't know who said it, probably Billy Graham or someone, like, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. And it's that idea of, it's not about just proclaiming. And I think a lot of people that I hear, a lot of older people that really do want like this proclamation to go out with really good heart. Like they're like, we should preach the gospel and not back down, and we need to be bold. And I agree with all of that, but I think it's our lives should be doing the preaching, should be doing the sharing. And you can't ever share without, like, sometimes I'm like, well, we can't share it because I don't even know if we really, when was the last time we interacted? We played with that toy. We forgot we even had it, right? And so I think that's a big part of it as well, that makes us live out that a little bit more in our lives.
I mean, I was just thinking about, here at Christ Community through Easter, you just had 200 plus people say yes to Jesus and plant a seed.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Typically, people, when they first make those declarations, those decisions and commitments, you see it in their life. Man, they're serving, they're excited, they're sharing. There's a fresh experience that they've had that causes them to respond with words, but also with actions. And I think the key is, as we continue to walk with Jesus, be in relationship with him, hopefully we're still having fresh experiences. And hopefully we're still having experiences that, man, fill us with joy and passion and life and love, to where we can't help it, but we want other people to experience that too. Because I will say this, man, our world is hurting. People are hurting everywhere we go. I'm more convinced than ever. People are looking for what we have, but they're waiting. And a lot of times our insecurities put up these walls and, make statements and do things. But at the end of the day, people want what Jesus authentically offers them, which is life and hope and unconditional love.
So as we wrap things up here, what are the markers of a virtuous life for Christians? If we're virtue signaling, what is the signal that we should be sending?
I mean, my mind instantly goes to John 15, abiding in Christ, being someone that, I mean, it's a constant flow happening in our lives. And I think a lot of maybe our life is like just a pool that hasn't been, touched in a while, and it's starting to get this film over, and it should be constantly this thing that's inflowing the Spirit, and then being able to export fresh living water, and not just this thing that's just kind of been sitting there and dead for a while and has that nasty film over it. And sometimes our lives can just kind of look like that. There's no life, there's no springing up of any of this stuff. And so I think it has to be lives that are consistently being filled with the Spirit so we can have something to actually give out, and are being pruned. You know, that John 15 isn't just like be connected to the vine. It's also like this painful process is I'm going to be cutting some things out of your life. And maybe that means apologizing or realizing I put this fruit out there that wasn't very good and that needs to be pruned, and I need to let people know about it, because it is something that's leading to rotting happening and not growth happening in my life. It's choking out the fruit that God wants in my life. And so what that looks like, I mean, that's such a churchy answer, but what does that look like, you know, in my life?
You answered it very well, Pastor Alex.
I mean, it
I was
is.
Say, I'm saying amen over here.
I think it's the fruit of the Spirit are the markers, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why we're, you know, patience, peace.
That's
Am I more peaceful? Am I more patient? Do I have self-control? That's a big thing when it comes to, I think, some of this kind of stuff.
I think, Eric, when you asked the question, my instant thought was, I need to ask that to myself. I don't need to share, necessarily share. You did a great job sharing, but I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Is like, God, what is that virtue in me that you are developing, that you've blessed me with, the passions you've given me? What do you want me to share? And so I think, to me, it was I want to be curious about what that looks like in my life and kind of turn that inward on myself too.
How do you always make it so personal? I mean, you
always
make it so personal, which is powerful. I'm over here dang, I'm going to be asking that question to myself. I'm ready to preach to somebody else.
I think it's a dangerous question too.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
I think it is real dangerous. And I remember Mark, it was probably 8 years ago, he gave this invitation, and it was a prayer he could pray, God, do whatever it takes in me to accomplish your will in me. And it's just this.
Accomplish your will through me.
Through me.
Yeah, that's good.
And so it's just in that is the answer. And it's I think we try to answer, but it's different for each of us. It's why we need the Holy Spirit. That's why relationship with the Lord is so important too.
It's good.
Too many Christians without a joy factor, I'll tell you that much. Right. And that's a marker of the Holy Spirit. And so you got evangelists that are out there bro, you got no joy going on in your life. You need to
you need to smile more, Alex.
I hear that. Trust me, I've got a bad resting face.
That's why I said it.
I would just say I agree with both of you guys. And literally the two things I thought of, that prayer you talked about, we would say our dangerous prayer is, Lord, change me, and then use me to change the world. And if I can pray that every day, because every day I need to be changed, and God wants to prune things from me, and the fruits of the Spirit, I think, is the ultimate expression of what it looks like. And I love the end of that verse. It says, "There's no law against these." Because when we model those, when we live those out, whether it's on social media or in life, nobody can say nothing against us. Nobody's ever said, man, you're too joyful. You need to tone down the joy factor. Man, you're too loving. You're too peace-filled. You're too, you control yourself too much. Nobody's ever said that before. And so the prayer is that, man, God changes me so I can reflect those fruits more, and hopefully see other people experience those.
I mean, when you think you got it figured out, why don't you just ask your spouse 100%. Or your kid, just go through the list, the person that you're closest to if you're single, and they might be able to invite you into some ways you can be asking the Lord to work in your life.
Until we're dead.
Yeah.
God's not going to be done changing us.
Amen.
All right. Well, thanks, Josh, for hanging out with us today. Always
conversation.
A joy to
Appreciate
have you here. And thanks for everybody that was listening. If you have any questions or concerns and you'd like to reach out to us, you can do so via email. Send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can reach out to us on social media @cccomaha, and we'd love to hear from you. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.